Marcus Henderson stepped out of his black Mercedes, adjusting his expensive suit as he looked up at the towering glass building that housed his corporate empire. At 42, he had built Henderson Industries from nothing into a multi-million-dollar company. His sharp eyes and calculated decisions had earned him respect in the business world, but also a reputation for being cold and distant. The morning sun reflected off his watch as he checked the time. Another busy day awaited him, filled with board meetings and contract negotiations. Success had come at a price. He barely saw his 8-year-old son David anymore. The boy lived with Marcus after his divorce 2 years ago, but most of David's care fell to a rotating staff of nannies and housekeepers. David was different from other children. He had been diagnosed with autism when he was 4, and Marcus struggled to understand his son's unique needs. The boy rarely spoke, avoided eye contact, and had intense reactions to changes in routine. Marcus loved his son deeply, but he felt helpless and often buried himself in work instead of facing the challenges at home. As Marcus walked toward his office building, his phone buzzed with a text from his current housekeeper, Mrs. Patterson. She was quitting effective immediately, citing David's difficult behavior as too challenging to handle. This was the third housekeeper in 6 months. Marcus felt his jaw tighten with frustration and worry. He spent most of the morning trying to find a replacement through various agencies, but his reputation preceded him. Word had spread that the Henderson household was a difficult placement. By lunchtime, Marcus realized he might need to take time off work, something he had never done since starting his company. The afternoon brought an emergency board meeting about a potential merger. Marcus tried to focus on the presentations and financial projections, but his mind kept wandering to David. Who was watching him right now? Was he eating lunch? The boy had very specific food preferences and routines that most caregivers found overwhelming. As the meeting dragged on, Marcus received another text, this time from his neighbor, saying they had seen David sitting alone in the backyard looking upset. The temporary babysitter he had hired that morning had apparently left early without notice. Marcus excused himself from the meeting, something his board members had never seen him do. Racing home through afternoon traffic, Marcus felt a growing sense of panic. David needed consistency in calm environments. Being alone and confused would be terrifying for him. Marcus realized how little he actually knew about managing his son's daily needs. The housekeepers and nannies had always handled the details while he focused on providing financially. When he pulled into his driveway, the house seemed eerily quiet. Marcus called out for David as he entered, but received no response. He searched the main floor, then headed upstairs to David's room. The boy was sitting in his closet, rocking back and forth with his hands over his ears, a sign that he was overwhelmed and distressed. Marcus knelt down carefully, knowing sudden movements could make things worse. "David, it's Dad, you're safe." The boy didn't acknowledge him, lost in his own world of anxiety and confusion. Marcus felt completely helpless, watching his son suffer and not knowing how to help. This moment crystallized everything Marcus had been avoiding. His success meant nothing if he couldn't take care of the most important person in his life. He realized that he needed to make fundamental changes, starting with finding someone who truly understood David's needs, not just another temporary solution, but someone who could provide the patience, knowledge, and genuine care his son deserved. The next morning, Marcus made a decision that shocked his assistant. He canceled all his meetings for the week and decided to personally interview potential caregivers for David. He had learned his lesson about rushing into arrangements without proper vetting. 3 days of interviews proved frustrating. Most applicants seemed more interested in the generous salary he offered than in understanding David's specific needs. They used clinical terms and spoke about autism like it was a problem to be managed, rather than a different way of experiencing the world. By Thursday afternoon, Marcus was losing hope when Maria Santos walked into his office. She was a 45-year-old woman from El Salvador who had been working as a domestic helper in the United States for 15 years. Her references were solid, though not from wealthy families like the previous candidates. She wore a simple dress and carried herself with quiet dignity. "Mr. Henderson," Maria began in accented but clear English, "I want to be honest with you. I've never worked specifically with an autistic child, but I raised my nephew who had similar challenges back home. I learned that these children don't need to be fixed. They need to be understood. Marcus was intrigued by her approach. Unlike other candidates who had rattled off their credentials, Maria asked thoughtful questions about David's interests, his routines, and what made him happy. She wanted to know about his favorite foods, his sleeping patterns, and how he communicated when words were difficult. "Can I meet David?" Maria asked. "I believe children can sense when someone genuinely cares about them. If he doesn't feel comfortable with me, then I'm not the right person for this job." Marcus appreciated her honesty and arranged for her to spend an afternoon at the house. He watched from a distance as Maria sat quietly in the living room, not trying to force interaction with David. She simply began organizing some scattered toys, humming softly under her breath. David, curious about this new person who wasn't demanding his attention, slowly emerged from behind the couch where he had been hiding. Maria noticed him but didn't make direct eye contact, instead continuing her gentle humming while she worked. She had brought a small wooden puzzle with her. Nothing fancy, just colorful pieces that made satisfying clicking sounds when connected. To Marcus's amazement, David crept closer to investigate the puzzle. Maria slowly pushed it toward him without saying a word. The boy picked up a piece and studied it intently. When he successfully placed it, Maria smiled and gave a small nod of approval, but didn't overwhelm him with praise or excitement. For the next hour, Marcus watched his son engage more than he had seen in months. David didn't speak, but he seemed relaxed and focused. Maria seemed to instinctively understand when to give him space and when gentle encouragement was welcome. During their follow-up conversation, Maria explained her philosophy. "Mr. Henderson, David is not broken. His mind works differently, like a radio tuned to a different frequency. We need to learn his language, not force him to speak ours all the time." She shared stories about her nephew Miguel, who had similar challenges. At first, my sister was so worried about what Miguel couldn't do that she missed all the amazing things he could do. He noticed details others missed, remembered things perfectly, and had the most pure, honest heart. David has these gifts too. Marcus found himself opening up about his struggles and fears. Maria listened without judgment, understanding that his long work hours came from feeling overwhelmed rather than not caring. "You love your son very much," she observed. "Sometimes love needs to look different than we imagined." By the end of the day, Marcus knew he had found someone special. Maria wasn't just looking for a job. She genuinely wanted to help David thrive. She asked for a trial period, wanting to make sure the arrangement worked for everyone involved, especially David. That evening, as Marcus tucked his son into bed, David did something unexpected. He pointed toward the living room and said, "Maria." It was the first new word he had spoken in weeks. Marcus felt tears in his eyes, realizing that maybe, finally, David would have the patient, understanding care he needed. Maria began working for the Henderson family on a Monday morning, arriving early with a small bag containing what she called her special tools, sensory toys, picture cards, and homemade snacks that had worked with her nephew Miguel. She moved through the house quietly, learning David's routines and observing his patterns. The first week was about building trust. Maria discovered that David had an incredible memory for numbers and could recite the license plates of every car on their street. Instead of seeing this as unusual behavior, she celebrated it, asking him to help her remember where they parked when they went on small outings to the nearby park. Marcus noticed changes immediately. The house felt calmer. David's meltdowns, which had been happening daily, became less frequent and less intense. Maria had introduced simple visual schedules that helped David understand what would happen throughout the day, reducing his anxiety about unexpected changes. "Mr. Marcus," Maria said one evening after David had gone to bed, "David is trying to tell us things all the time. We just need to learn how to listen." She showed Marcus a notebook where she had been tracking David's behaviors, looking for patterns and triggers. "See here, he gets upset every Tuesday around 3 p.m. That's when the garbage truck comes down the street. The noise bothers him, but he can't tell us that with words." Maria had started preparing David for Tuesday afternoons by playing soft music and having him help her with quiet activities in the back of the house during garbage collection time. The Tuesday meltdown stopped completely. She also discovered David's love for sorting and organizing. Rather than discouraging this behavior as previous caregivers had done, Maria incorporated it into learning activities. She brought colorful buttons, shells, and small objects that David could sort by size, color, or texture. These activities improved his fine motor skills while satisfying his need for order and predictability. Marcus began coming home earlier from work, curious about the peaceful atmosphere in his house. He would find Maria and David sitting together at the kitchen table, working on puzzles or looking through picture books. Maria never pushed David to interact in typical ways, but she created opportunities for connection through his interests. One afternoon, Marcus witnessed something remarkable. David had accidentally knocked over a glass of juice, something that previously would have triggered a major meltdown due to the unexpected mess and change in routine. Instead of panicking, David looked at Maria and pointed to the spill. She calmly handed him paper towels and they cleaned it up together, with Maria narrating their actions in simple, positive language. "Accidents happen, David. We clean up and everything is okay again. You're doing such a good job helping me." David didn't respond verbally, but Marcus could see the relief on his son's face at Maria's calm reaction. Maria began teaching Marcus these techniques during their evening conversations. She showed him how to give David processing time after speaking to him, how to use simple, concrete language, and how to recognize when David was getting overwhelmed before it escalated to a meltdown. "Your son is very smart, Mr. Marcus. He understands much more than he can express. Sometimes I see him watching you, wanting to connect but not knowing how. Maybe you could try some of these approaches too." Marcus was initially skeptical. His own father had been distant and critical, and Marcus had learned to equate love with providing material security. But seeing David's positive responses to Maria's methods made him curious about trying a different approach. One Saturday morning, instead of working in his home office as usual, Marcus joined Maria and David in the kitchen. Maria was teaching David to help prepare his favorite snack, apple slices with peanut butter. She guided Marcus on how to offer simple choices and praise David's efforts rather than focusing on the end result. When David successfully arranged the apple slices in a neat pattern on his plate, Marcus followed Maria's example and simply said, "Good organizing, David." His son looked up briefly, making fleeting eye contact before returning to his careful arrangement. It was a small moment, but it felt like progress. That evening, Maria shared more of her story with Marcus. She had left her own children in El Salvador to work in America, sending money home to support their education. "I miss my babies every day, but I know I'm doing important work here too." David needs someone who sees his beautiful mind, not just his challenges. Marcus began to understand that Maria wasn't just caring for David. She was loving him with the patience and understanding he had been seeking his whole life. 3 weeks into Maria's employment, David experienced his first major challenge since her arrival. A water pipe burst in the kitchen on a Wednesday morning, flooding the floor and requiring emergency repairs. The sudden disruption to David's routine, combined with strangers in the house and unexpected noise, sent him into complete overwhelm. Marcus was at the office when Maria called him, her voice calm but concerned. "Mr. Marcus, David is having a very hard time with the water situation. He's locked himself in his bedroom and won't come out. I think you should come home." Marcus immediately left an important client presentation, something that would have been unthinkable just a month ago. When he arrived home, he found workmen drilling and hammering while Maria sat patiently outside David's bedroom door, speaking to him in soothing tones through the closed door. "David, it's okay. The loud noises will stop soon. You're safe in your room. Maria is right here." She had been maintaining this gentle reassurance for over an hour, never showing frustration or impatience. Marcus felt helpless watching his son's distress, but Maria had a plan. She suggested they move David's entire morning routine to the quietest bedroom upstairs, away from the construction noise. Together, they carefully transported his breakfast, favorite blanket, and sensory toys to create a temporary safe space. It took 3 hours of patient waiting and gentle coaxing before David finally emerged from his room. Maria didn't rush him or try to minimize his feelings. Instead, she acknowledged how scary and confusing the morning had been while showing him that the house was returning to normal. This crisis became a turning point for Marcus. He witnessed firsthand Maria's unwavering dedication to David's emotional well-being. While other caregivers might have given up or demanded he take David elsewhere for the day, Maria treated the situation as an opportunity to help David develop coping strategies. That afternoon, She created a simple picture story about what had happened, using photos and drawings to help David process the unexpected events. Sometimes things break and need to be fixed. It can be loud and scary, but then everything gets better. She included pictures of the workmen leaving and the kitchen returning to normal. Marcus began to see how Maria's approach extended far beyond basic childcare. She was teaching David life skills, emotional regulation, and resilience. More importantly, she was showing Marcus how to be the father David needed. Over the following days, Marcus made a conscious effort to apply Maria's techniques in his own interactions with David. Instead of feeling frustrated when David didn't respond to questions immediately, Marcus learned to wait patiently and offer multiple choice options when possible. Instead of trying to make David conform to typical social expectations, he began celebrating his son's unique strengths and interests. The breakthrough came on a Sunday morning. Marcus was reading the newspaper while David played with his number blocks nearby. Without being prompted, David approached his father and carefully placed blocks spelling out "Dad" on the coffee table. It wasn't traditional communication, but it was David's way of reaching out for connection. Marcus felt his heart skip a beat. "Thank you, David, I love you too," he said softly, not making a big show that might overwhelm his son, but letting him know the gesture was received and appreciated. Maria, watching from the kitchen, smiled with tears in her eyes. She had seen this pattern before with her nephew. Once children felt truly understood and accepted, they began finding their own ways to express love and connection. That evening, Marcus made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. He asked Maria if she would be willing to adjust her schedule to work some evenings and weekends, not because he wanted to work more, but because he wanted to learn more about supporting David. He wanted Maria to teach him everything she knew about understanding his son's needs. "Mr. Marcus," Maria said warmly, "I think David would love to have more time with his papa. But remember, you don't need to become perfect overnight. David doesn't need a perfect father. He needs a father who tries to understand him and loves him exactly as he is." Marcus realized that his relationship with David had been transformed not just by Maria's care for his son, but by her gentle guidance in helping him become a better father. She wasn't just an employee anymore. She had become an essential part of their family's healing and growth. The house that had once felt chaotic and stressful was becoming a place of understanding, patience, and genuine connection. Marcus began to see that true success wasn't measured only in business achievements, but in the quality of relationships and the love shared within his own home. 2 months after Maria joined their family, Marcus faced an unexpected crisis that would test everything they had built together. During a routine business trip to Chicago, Marcus received devastating news. His company's largest client was pulling their contract due to a competitor's lower bid. This represented nearly 40% of Henderson Industries' annual revenue. Marcus spent 3 sleepless days in emergency meetings with his legal team and accountants, trying to prevent the company he had spent 15 years building from collapsing. The stress was overwhelming, and for the first time since Maria's arrival, he found himself falling back into old patterns of working around the clock and avoiding personal responsibilities. When he finally returned home on Friday evening, exhausted and defeated, Marcus walked into a house that felt completely different from the chaos he expected. Instead of finding David in distress from his father's absence and the disrupted routine, he discovered his son and Maria working together on an elaborate puzzle at the dining room table. "Papa," David called out, using a word he had never said before. The boy didn't run to him in a typical greeting, but he looked directly at Marcus and pointed to an empty chair they had apparently saved for him at the table. Maria looked up with understanding eyes. "David missed you very much, Mr. Marcus. We made a countdown calendar so he could understand when you would come home. Would you like to see what we've been working on?" Marcus sat down heavily, feeling the weight of his business problems pressing on his shoulders. David carefully showed him sections of the puzzle they had completed, explaining in his simple way how certain pieces fit together. For a moment, Marcus forgot about contracts and clients, focused entirely on his son's quiet pride in their accomplishment. After David went to bed, Marcus found himself opening up to Maria about his business crisis in a way he had never done with anyone. "I might lose everything, Maria. I don't know how I'll support David, how I'll pay for his therapies, his special needs. I feel like I'm failing him as a father. Maria listened quietly, then spoke with gentle wisdom. Mr. Marcus, these past months I've watched you become the father David always needed. That's not about money or big houses. David doesn't need you to be rich. He needs you to be present, patient, and loving. You've learned to do that. She shared more about her own struggles, leaving her children in El Salvador to work for families who didn't always treat her well. Sometimes I cleaned houses for people who barely saw me as human, just so my children could go to school. But working here, helping David, being part of your family, this has been a blessing for me too. Marcus realized he had been so focused on providing material security that he had almost missed the most important changes happening in his life. David was happier and more settled than ever before. Their home felt peaceful. He had learned to be present and connected with his son in ways he never thought possible. The next morning brought more bad news. Another client was considering leaving, and Marcus would need to lay off nearly half his staff. But instead of panicking and abandoning his family responsibilities, Marcus made different choices. He worked from his home office so he could still have lunch with David. He took breaks to help with the evening routine Maria had established. David seemed to sense his father's stress and began doing small things to comfort him, bringing Marcus his favorite coffee mug, sitting quietly nearby while he made difficult phone calls, even attempting to organize the scattered papers on his desk in his systematic way. Maria watched these interactions with growing admiration. David is showing you love the way he knows how, Mr. Marcus. See how he brings you things when you're upset? He learned that from watching you care for him. Over the weekend, as Marcus worked on a plan to save his company, Maria made a suggestion that initially shocked him. What if this is an opportunity, not just a disaster? You've learned so much about patience and understanding with David. Maybe you could use those skills to help other families, too. She had been researching autism support services in their area and discovered a severe shortage of resources for families who couldn't afford expensive private therapies. Your business skills combined with what you've learned about David's needs, maybe you could create something to help other children and parents. The idea initially seemed impossible to Marcus. He was focused on saving what he had built, not starting something entirely new. But as he spent the weekend watching Maria work with David, seeing the transformation in both his son and himself, he began to wonder if she might be right. Maria's suggestion planted a seed that would grow over the following days. Maybe losing everything he thought was important would lead him to discover what actually mattered most, not just for his own family, but for others facing similar challenges. That Sunday evening, as they prepared David for the upcoming week with their visual schedule, Marcus realized that his definition of success was fundamentally changing. The metrics that had driven him for years, profit margins, market share, corporate recognition, seemed less important than David's genuine smile and the peace he felt in his own home. The following Monday morning brought the call Marcus had been dreading. Henderson Industries was being forced into bankruptcy. 15 years of building his empire had crumbled in just 2 weeks. As he hung up the phone in his home office, Marcus felt a mixture of devastation and strange relief. The constant pressure and stress that had defined his life was suddenly gone, replaced by uncertain freedom. Maria found him sitting quietly at his desk, staring out the window at David playing in the backyard. She didn't offer empty reassurances or ask unnecessary questions. Instead, she simply brought him a cup of coffee and sat down in the chair across from his desk. "I need to tell you, Maria," Marcus began slowly. "I can't afford to keep paying your full salary anymore. I'm going to have to sell the house, probably move somewhere much smaller. I understand if you need to find another position." Maria was quiet for a long moment, watching David through the window as he carefully arranged fallen leaves into neat patterns on the ground. "Mr. Marcus, do you remember what I told you when I first came here? I said these children don't need to be fixed. They need to be understood. I think maybe that's true for adults too sometimes." She turned to face him directly. "You're not broken because your business failed. You're still David's father. You're still a good man who learned how to love his son better. Those things didn't disappear with your company." Over the next few days, as Marcus began the painful process of closing his business and settling debts, Maria proved her loyalty in unexpected ways. She insisted on staying with the family even when Marcus could only pay her a fraction of her original salary. She helped him research smaller, more affordable homes in good school districts for David. She even assisted with packing and organizing their belongings. David, with his heightened sensitivity to changes and emotions, seemed to understand that something significant was happening. Instead of becoming more agitated as their routine shifted, he surprised both adults by becoming more affectionate and helpful. He began bringing Marcus small objects, a smooth stone, a perfect leaf, his favorite toy car, as if offering comfort the only way he knew how. One evening, as they packed books in the living room, David did something that made Marcus stop breathing for a moment. His son walked over, climbed carefully onto Marcus's lap, and leaned against his chest. David had never initiated physical contact like this before. Marcus held perfectly still, afraid to break the spell, while tears streamed silently down his face. "He knows you need hugs right now," Maria said softly. "David feels love very deeply, even if he can't always show it in typical ways." During this difficult transition period, Maria's idea about helping other families began to take more concrete shape in Marcus's mind. He started volunteering at David's special education school, offering to help with administrative tasks and fundraising. He was shocked to discover how many families were struggling to access basic support services for their children with autism. Parents shared stories remarkably similar to his own, feeling overwhelmed and helpless, cycling through caregivers who didn't understand their children's needs, working constantly to afford therapies while missing precious moments with their kids. Marcus realized his business experience, combined with his newfound understanding of autism, could potentially make a real difference. Maria encouraged him to attend local support group meetings for parents of autistic children. Initially, Marcus felt out of place among people who seemed to have much less money, but much more experience navigating their children's needs. However, his perspective as both a former business owner and a father learning to understand his autistic son offered unique value to the group. He began helping other parents with practical matters, researching insurance coverage, organizing group purchases of sensory toys and equipment, and using his negotiation skills to advocate for better services at schools. These activities didn't pay anything, but Marcus found them more fulfilling than any business deal he had ever completed. The house sale was finalized on a rainy Thursday in November. As they prepared to move to a modest 3-bedroom home across town, Marcus watched Maria carefully pack David's sensory toys and comfort items. She had labeled every box with both words and pictures so David could understand where his belongings were going. "Are you sure about staying with us, Maria?" Marcus asked one final time. "The new house is smaller, the neighborhood isn't as nice, and I still can't promise when I'll be able to pay you properly again." Maria smiled as she watched David organize his favorite books into a small box he could carry himself. "Mr. Marcus, I've worked in big fancy houses where nobody cared about each other. This family, we take care of each other. David needs me, and honestly, I need both of you too. We'll figure out the rest together." As they drove away from the house that had represented Marcus's old life, he realized he wasn't just moving to a new address. He was moving toward a completely different understanding of what success and family could look like. 6 months after losing his business, Marcus stood in the community center basement, watching 15 parents of autistic children participate in the support group he had helped organize. What had started as informal conversations in David's school parking lot had grown into a structured network providing resources, advocacy, and emotional support to families throughout the city. Maria sat in the back of the room, quietly helping a new mother, whose 4-year-old son was having difficulty with the unfamiliar environment. Marcus watched her work the same patient magic she had used with David, creating calm in the midst of chaos without drawing attention to herself. David, now 9 years old, was playing contentedly in the childcare area Maria had organized. He had become something of a helper with younger children, naturally understanding their need for quiet spaces and predictable routines. His growth over the past year had been remarkable, not because he had changed who he was, but because he had found a world that accepted and supported who he was meant to be. The support group had evolved into something Marcus never expected. Using his business skills and the deep understanding of autism he had gained through David and Maria, he had successfully secured grants to provide free respite care, sensory toy libraries, and advocacy services to low-income families. What he couldn't offer in wealth, he made up for with knowledge, connections, and genuine understanding. Marcus had taken a part-time consulting job to pay their basic expenses, but his real work, the work that filled him with purpose, was building this community of support. He had learned that his talents for organization, negotiation, and strategic thinking were just as valuable in nonprofit work as they had been in corporate boardrooms. That evening, as they drove home in Marcus's modest sedan, David surprised both adults by speaking up from the back seat. "Maria helps kids like me," he said clearly. It was one of his longer sentences, and the pride in his voice was unmistakable. "Yes, she does," Marcus agreed, catching Maria's eye in the rearview mirror. "And you help kids like you too, David. You show them it's okay to be themselves." Their small house had become a gathering place for families in their network. The living room that once showcased expensive artwork now displayed children's drawings and sensory-friendly lighting. The kitchen that had rarely been used for actual cooking was now the heart of meal preparation for support group meetings and playdates. Maria had officially become David's full-time aide at school, a position that allowed her to use her natural gifts while earning a steady income. She had also begun studying to become a certified autism support specialist, determined to help even more families navigate the challenges she understood so well. One evening, as they prepared David's visual schedule for the next day, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. "Maria, do you ever regret staying with us when everything fell apart? You could have found work with a wealthy family who could pay you much more." Maria looked up from the picture card she was organizing. "Mr. Marcus, money is important for survival, but this," she gestured around their modest but warm home, "this is living. David is happy, you've found work that feeds your soul, and I get to do what I love every day. How could I regret that?" David, overhearing their conversation, brought both adults a drawing he had made that afternoon. It showed 3 stick figures holding hands outside a small house, a father, a woman with dark hair, and a boy in the middle. Above them, he had written "My Family" in his careful, precise handwriting. Marcus felt the familiar tightness in his throat that came whenever David showed affection in his unique way. This simple drawing represented everything he had gained by losing everything else. He had a son who felt safe and loved enough to express himself. He had meaningful work that made a difference in other families' lives. And he had Maria, not just as an employee, but as the person who had taught him what unconditional love and acceptance looked like. The wealthy businessman who had once measured success in profit margins and stock options was gone. In his place was a father who understood that David's careful arrangement of toys showed deep intelligence, that his difficulties with eye contact didn't mean he lacked empathy, and that his different way of experiencing the world was not something to fix, but something to celebrate and support. As Marcus tucked David into bed that night, his son did something that still amazed him even after months of similar moments. David looked directly into his father's eyes and said, "I love you, Papa." The words were clear and intentional, a gift David gave when he felt completely safe and understood. "I love you too, David." "Sweet dreams," Marcus replied, knowing that he was living proof that sometimes losing everything you think you want leads you to find everything you actually need. In the kitchen, Maria was preparing tomorrow's snacks and reviewing the visual schedule, just as she had done every night for over a year. But now she was family, not just help. She was the bridge that had connected a father and son, the teacher who had shown them both how to love each other better, and the heart of a home that had been transformed from a showcase of wealth into a sanctuary of understanding and acceptance.